Good morning, Bill. Good morning, Brian. How is everybody today?
Good,
Very
Hayley.
well, thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Hayley, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and to whoever we hope will join us in conversation, my dear friend, Dr. Bill Stayton, who is just an amazing man and the best teacher I have ever seen in action anywhere. He's an American Baptist theologian, a minister, and one of the world's leading sexologists. And he's come out with a new book called Sinless Sex, a challenge to religions. And I just want to say quickly, this book is not for theologians or those, or just theologians, or those who are in the sex education movement. This is for everybody, anybody who wants to think about spirituality and sexuality and the coming together of the two. So with that, Bill, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Bill. And I am super excited for today because I consider you, as I was just saying, sort of my masterclass of the week. And I think our conversation is so timely because over the last month, I have been struggling with how to fix the world. And I remember that you have a very interesting perspective on sex and how understanding sexuality could actually be one of the, if not that answer, to helping the world be a bit better. So to start off with, Bill, could you give us a background on what you consider sexuality?
Well, sexuality is who we are. It's more than just a genital sex. It's being who we are as human beings. And it encompasses all of who we are. Our relationships, our body, our personality, our issues and concerns around human beings and interacting with human beings. It's all of who we are.
Which comes first, sexuality or sociology?
Well, sexuality, we're sex from before birth until death. And then I don't know what happens.
So what would be the difference between sexuality and sociology? Because at a very high level, I consider sociology sort of and anthropology sort of that more human aspect of it. But the way that it sounds like you're speaking, sexuality is the humanity of it.
Sociology is about what we do and our place in the world and our study of systems that we interact with. Actually, I think spirituality would be the primary science, if you will, and everything else came from spirituality. So psychology, psychiatry, sociology, social work, all of those are offspring of spirituality.
And how do you define spirituality, Bill?
Spirituality is when we're asking the meaning of anything, it's a spiritual issue. Whether it's religious or not has nothing to do with it. But whenever we ask for meaning, that's a spiritual question. Science doesn't talk about meanings. It describes life and what's happening. Spirituality is when we ask for meaning, that's a spiritual issue because it goes to who we are about and what we're about in life.
Where's the conjunct when spirituality and sexuality, what's the link there? When we talk about sinless sex, what's the link between spirituality which is sin, and in the title, right? And sex. I don't mean that spirituality is about sin, but in your title, Sinless Sex, you bring the two together in the title, right? One, or religion and sex. When do the two come together? How are they linked?
Well, they're linked in that we're asking for meaning. What is our sexuality about?
Mm-hmm.
What are we about? Where are we going? Who are we? What does it mean to be a sexual person? Those are all spiritual questions. The problem is religion has not done well in dealing with sexuality. I think that one of the great powers that religion and governments have is when they control your sexuality. Then they've got real power over you. And I think that's often what has messed up our spirituality, if you will. So that I think that in our evolution as human beings, our very earliest issues as human beings, as Homo sapiens, was the meaning of death. Because people were dying and they didn't know anything about it, so there must be something. And then they would dream about the person that died. And so spirituality was the very first thing that developed in Homo sapiens, in our consciousness. Religion is way down the line of evolution to be the almost last thing, which put rituals and practices, spiritual practices into a body. Mm-hmm. So that that was the last to come. Now, I believe that one of the problems is that too many people will say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And I think that can be very true, because I think that what happens is that they're asking questions and religion isn't helping to answer these questions. Instead, it's putting on to people something that's heavy, whereas our sexuality is something that is so natural to us. It's like breathing. Breathing is a natural function. So is sexuality, sexual response. It's a natural function, but it's the only natural function that can be repressed for a lifetime.
Hayley?
Interesting words there. So many. I have to slow down. My mind is just going boom, 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 boom. I think first off, Bill, what was your journey in coming to understanding sexuality the way that you see it now? And the way that you see it now very much resonates with what I believe sexuality to be.
Well, actually, it's been a journey. I've always been curious about sex and sexuality, about who I was as a person, what was this about, what is the meaning of being a sexual person. I've always been curious from a child. I've always been curious about religion, even though my parents were not religious. In fact, they were against religion, which was a blessing, frankly, in that they were burned in their own upbringing by religion. And after they got married, they decided they didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore. So in a sense, they were disappointed when I became religious, because I've always had that. In fact, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I used to set up, we went to church twice, Easter and Christmas Eve, for the music mainly. And but I would come home and I would set up the living room and I would start preaching at 4 years old. And so I think my mother was not surprised when I finally went into this. My dad was disappointed.
Yeah. What did he want you to be, Bill?
He wanted me to be a salesman like him
Uh-huh.
and go into business with him. That was
Yeah.
his dream.
Yeah.
What
My
were you-
father had, go ahead, Hayley.
No, carry on with your talk.
Well, my father was also disappointed, with my dedicating myself to educating others on LGBTQ issues until I started working at the corporation level, which he was familiar with. And then, okay, now I see the value of it. But Hayley, you had a question.
I was going to ask you, Bill, in going into religion and even at that young age, were you looking for something, or was it just something that naturally resonated with you, do you think?
When I was a senior in college, I was invited to go to a conference on the ministry for people who were not interested in ministry, if you will. So I went to this conference, and during that week, it was presented that ministers are people who serve other people, who work for justice and the common good. And it brought out all the kinds of things that I was interested in. And so I came home from that conference and said, I think I've got the personality and the desires and the goals that would be fulfilled by being a minister. One of the things my dad used to say is that he felt ministers were irrelevant, that they had no real concept of life, that they lived in a bubble. And one of the things he learned in my early ministry was that he was very wrong about that. And he said several times that he felt that I was really making a contribution in a way that I never would have as a salesperson.
Even with the work on sexuality, did your folks respond positively when you got involved in that?
Well, my dad had died when I became a sexologist, but my mom used to say, I think your dad would be delighted if he,
Yeah. Hayley, if I can, I wanted to ask Bill about going back to the difference between spirituality and religion. This point in American history, it's the lowest number of people who identify as church going than ever before. But that doesn't mean that the majority of people are not spiritual. I think what I see happening is that there's this great movement, spiritual movement, of people who don't adhere to doctrines. They don't disrespect other religious traditions. They don't find meaning by putting others down, but they're coming together around love, about service, and about our intersectionality, about how we're all related person to person, that what impacts one person impacts all of us. Do you agree with that reflection?
Yes. Fortunately, I've been associated ever since I went into the ministry with progressive churches and progressive ideas in religion that reflect more justice orientation and looking for equality and looking for helping the underserved. That's been a big issue. And to me, my sense of I cannot not be a member of a faith community, which is really interesting. I cannot not be a member of a faith community. For me, it provides community. It provides a goal and a service community that I'm able to act out my energy in justice issues, equality issues, serving the underserved communities. I'm really passionate about reaching out to others. And I find my best way to do that is through a faith community.
Hayley?
I was going back to what you said, Brian, about how you see that people seem to be coming more to the core message of the religion. It's not so much what religion it is, but the core message. And it also goes back to something earlier you said too, that once you started being in the corporate world, that's when your father was like, okay, now I'm proud of you.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience, Bill, and where you're going, what do you think is going to take for people to look at sexuality at the core versus this sinful topic? And do you see an improvement that way?
Well, I hope so. Yes, I believe the arc of history is towards justice. That's my hope. And I try to embody this, by the way, in my book. I start out in the beginning after explaining who I am and helping the reader understand where I'm coming from and why I wrote this book and why I'm in the work I'm in. I go into how do we develop our sexual value systems? What went into being having sexual values? And then how did our moral development develop? How did we develop as moral beings? What is that all about? So I try to set the framework for my book by looking at sexual value systems and morality and moral development. And then I go into the issues that I, both as a pastor, as a professor, as a therapist, have worked with people. And that's around their body, their anatomy, for intersex persons, people who have gender identity and expression issues, sexual orientations that people get involved in, lifestyles that people live out. These are all issues. And then being a good lover. I think that we're born sexual, but we're not born lovers. And to me, I try to help that be an offering from religion to be a good lover. Mm-hmm. So that I have chapters on all of these issues, which are core issues that religion has been against or not helped people with.
Hitting.
And then I go into trying to pull it all together with a hope of why we are going in a direction that is positive and is healthy and that is safe and secure in our sexuality. So that's kind of the flow of this book.
What are sexual values and morals?
Well, all the decisions we make are made from a moral decision-making process. And where does that develop? And how does that develop? And I looked at in evolution, because I'm very into the whole evolutionary process. And I think that morality is a developmental issue evolutionarily. And one of the problems is that some of the fundamentalist religions are stuck at almost a pre-human level of morality. So,
Bill,
yes,
your and my mutual friend Mark Schoen made
yes.
a 3-minute animated movie out of my children's book, What's Gay? Asked May.
Yeah.
We are talking about it being aimed at 4-year-old to 10-year-olds. You said that we come into the world sexual and that religion ought to be teaching us how to be good lovers. At what age can we start talking to sexual beings, 4-year-olds, about being good lovers?
Well, actually, parents are sexuality educators from before birth. Mm-hmm. The way the parents reacted to each other, whether it's same gender parents or other gender parents, the way they treated each other, the way they experienced their sexual relationship, the way they made love, all of that was sex education prenatally and pre-birth. Then I think we are their sexuality educators from then on. The way they talk to each other, the way they talk to their children, the way they work with their children to develop their language, to develop their behaviors. The parents are the primary sex educators, and they need to see that they're that from the day they're born, the children are born. So that all we are as religion or education are helpers in this process of, that's why I believe parents need sex education as much as children do, because they are going to be the primary sex educator. We're just adjunctive in religion and education.
A book that I love and has been really helpful in my understanding of my place in this universe is called The Kabbalion. And in that, they have a law about gender where they try and explain that it's so much more than masculine, feminine, it's so much more than just the act of sex. They go into positive, negative, creator, manifester, that everything in this world relies on one of like these 7 laws, and one of them being the law of gender. Would you say that I'm on the same page as you when I look at it that way, that it's not just, so when you're talking about sex education, we're not just talking about the physical aspect of sex, it's the notion of masculine, feminine, positive, negative, creator, manifester?
Well, the way I would frame it is that there are no binaries, that everything is on a spectrum. Yeah. Anatomy is on a spectrum. If you put a line of men together and a line of women together, and you ask them to place themselves according to whether they're masculine or feminine, you're going to have a whole spectrum of that. That's going to be true with gender identity also, and gender expression. I think that there is no such thing as a binary look at anything in all of these areas that we're talking about. I think that's true then when it comes to the sexual orientations. People are just not gay or straight or bi. There's a whole range of behaviors that really are the spectrum of sexuality. That's why and the same as lifestyles. People have such a variety of lifestyles. And one of the things I do in the book is I compare it with lifestyles in the Bible. The heterosexual monogamous marriage is not in the Bible. It's not prescribed. Interestingly, there are so many lifestyles in the Bible that they are almost match the kinds of lifestyles that people are living today. The same is true with sexual, erotic, and sexual response cycle. It's a whole spectrum of kinds of things that go into it. So I think it's really important to see things as non-binary, which means that one of my purposes is to normalize everything, except for things that are destructive: rape, child abuse, child sexual trafficking, misusing people sexually. I think these are all terrible. Spousal abuse. These things are evil. And I think that they're not to be in our moral teachings, if you will. And that we should see things, we normalize a lot of stuff that people already evilize.
Right.
Gay sex, or, different lifestyles.
Bill,
Yeah.
Shifting a little bit, if you would, do you believe that wisdom is innate? I mean, you're so in my life, you're one of the most accepting people that I've met with regard to difference, as well as Kathy, your wife.
Mhm.
It feels to me, with your description of preaching at age 4, that there was something old soul about you as a child, that if people met you, they would think that there's something unusual. Hayley, you should know Bill is an only child born on Christmas Day. So, but what is wisdom innate? Can wisdom be innate? Were you wise beyond your years as a child? And
No,
you weren't.
no.
Have you encountered children that you thought were old souls?
Well, knowledge has always been important to me. I've always
Mhm.
been a curious person
Mhm.
about everything. And so I think that one of the problems is that we almost bring people up to be ignorant, especially around sex. It's
Mhm.
better for them not to know.
Mhm.
And one of the things I was curious about sexuality from as far back as I can remember. And I can remember I asked my parents once about sex. And my dad left the room and my mom turned to me and said, Bill, you'll know.
Oh dear.
God will tell you.
Mm.
I often think that's why I became a minister. But she believed that we had this innate moral consciousness and moral intelligence or knowledge seeking that would answer all our questions, and that this came from God. So that my issue so often is that we bring people up to be in value ignorance. You know, it's hard to get people to take a course in sexuality, adults. Like they already know or they know enough, and there's a kind of a fear. When I do a sex education course, I think it's very important to have one for parents at the same time as their kids, and that they get exactly the same thing that we're giving the kids, and that they begin to become comfortable themselves as sexual beings. Then they can be more comfortable with their children. One of my goals is to help parents and children to be able to talk about sex as easily as they talk about going to the store to get milk and bread. To me, it should be that open and familiar and comfortable. That's not filled with shame and guilt and all the things that make people even become more distant from their sexuality. So that knowledge, I think, has always been something that has been an important thing for me. And then as a clergy person, as a professor and a teacher and a therapist, I want to teach skills. How do you be better lovers? How do you be better partners? How do you be better communicators? How do you connect with people in a much deeper, more meaningful way? So that those are important values for me. And where did they come from? I think that they've come out of my curiosity as a person from being a child.
Mm.
Bill, what do you mean when you say lovers? What does love mean? for you?
Well, love has different, I love my cars. I love my house. I love flowers. I love nature, which surrounds me here on our organic farm in California. Love with my partner is a much more intimate, communicative, responsive, respective kind of value that makes being sexual with my partner just gives it much more body, if you will, of being. There's a more totality to it, which I don't want to have sex with my car or my leaves out here or the flowers,
but you would defend the rights of people who do.
Oh, absolutely, totally. And there are people who do, and I see people all the time.
Yeah. How many paraphilias are there, Bill?
Yeah, I don't. But my favorite one was a urologist who sent me his client one time and the only thing that this guy turned on, he was in his 70s. The only thing that he ever turned on to was alligators. No, crocodiles. And I didn't have a problem with that. He told me that he had books on crocodiles. He went to the zoo all the time, and he would masturbate to the thought of crocodiles. And I said, well, I didn't know we had any alligators around here. He said, not alligators, crocodiles. Alligators are different. He described an alligator's mouth and teeth are different from a crocodile. So he had crocophilia. But he was great to talk to. And I had no problem as long as he didn't get hurt by, a crocodile.
Or hurt the crocodile.
No, I've seen people get turned on to almost everything. And most things are harmless. They're fun, safe, even though we demonize a lot of it.
And we demonize it because there's a sexual theology that says there's only one purpose for sex, procreation. Yeah.
Yeah, there are some things that are really, I think, core issues for religions today and for society. One is that in Genesis, it says, in the beginning, God created and wanted to procreate life, that was the meaning. Be fruitful and multiply. Well, that is a disaster today to teach that, because we are propagating population at geometric rates, so that what was once the formula for survival for human beings is now the formula for disaster. So that's an issue. Another issue is the whole issue of safe sex. Today we can have sex without getting pregnant or without getting a disease. We've got the methods that we can help people have sex, which separates out procreational sex from recreational or fun sex. And we haven't developed a theology around recreational sex, that people can have sex without any idea of ever either having a disease or having an unwanted pregnancy. The third thing, which is really, really a big thing, is that when I was a kid, adolescence was like 14 or 15. That's been going down 1 year per generation, to where now kids enter into puberty at 9 or 10, and some even earlier. When I was a kid, people married at 18 or 19. So that the period of adolescence was once a 2 to 4 year period, which made sense to say you shouldn't be you should be abstinent, so you can get used to your body and what's going on, and then enter into a relationship. But today, people aren't getting into a partnership until 28 or 29. That means from the time they enter puberty at 9, 10, 11, 12, to getting into a permanent relationship at 28, 29, 30, that's a 10 to 15 year period when asking them to be abstinent during that time is cruel and inhuman, I think. And not only that, it promotes dysfunction. Because if you tell a person don't, and you'll be guilty and shamed if you do, and then you get to a point where you enter into a relationship and all of a sudden you're supposed to turn on that switch. Okay, now you can have fun. It doesn't work. The switch doesn't work. So we're promoting sexual dysfunction by not having ways of helping young people negotiate in a healthy, sexual, secure, safe way their sexuality. The next thing is that when I was a kid, the average life expectancy was 40 or 50. And that's been going up to where now people are living much longer. So that when I was a kid, the average marriage lasted 25, 30 years, long enough to procreate and rear their children. But today, they have more years after they're procreating and rearing their children. They have more years together than all the years before. But we haven't helped them to, how do you keep a relationship alive and passionate and wet and, all that good stuff for 50 or 60 years, which the average marriage could be today. How do we keep that passion alive? And so we haven't done a good job of helping people to become good lovers for a long period of time. And so that's why I'm very passionate about the kinds of things that we've taught that have held people back from being fully human, being fully sexual, and being fully spiritual.
Bill,
Yeah.
on the topic
I'm kind of getting off on a...
No, you're in my mind.
It's great.
Yeah. On the topic of recreational sex, and this is a topic where I spend a lot of time thinking and trying to find my neutral ground on it. And then just when I feel like I found my neutral ground, there's like this next sort of thought bubble, and I'm like, oh boy, I have to think about that. And I feel like my generation, recreational sex really became recreational sex. And then it's like, I see the younger generation now where it is the way of life. And what are some of the tools, or what is something you can share to help sort of those kids that are like reaching their 18, 19, 20, 21, where recreational sex is the norm now, to keep themselves safe, not just physically, but also mentally, and still open to being sexual beings?
That's such an important core question. I love it, because I think that we need to do skill development with kids. I think we need to help them to, well, for example, I think a very important thing that we should help our kids to understand is that masturbation is really healthy and is really fun and really helps them to learn about their bodies, to love their bodies, to learn pleasure in their bodies. So that I think it's really important. And we had a Surgeon General that is a good friend of mine, Joycelyn Elders, during Clinton's time, who got fired because she thought it was good to teach masturbation to kids. And Clinton should have listened. But we've not helped kids to learn how to love their bodies and to learn pleasure in their bodies. And then we need the skills. One of the things I do in teaching sex education, and we do in our Whole Lives program, with which the Unitarian Universalist Church and the United Church of Christ have built a curriculum together, is teach kids the skills of interaction, communication, how to talk to one another, how to be able to say no in a loving way that doesn't alienate people or make them feel guilty or shameful for asking. They need to know how to respect others and to affirm them even though they say no. So there's ways of a young person saying no when they're not ready, and helping to know whether they're ready or not to have sex with a person, and how to then have a safe and fun and secure way of having sex with somebody where they're on the same page as what they want the meaning to be for it. That I think there's skills all along here that we can teach that can help people feel good about themselves, feel good about their decisions, be more in the decisions they make, and feel good about those decisions when they make them, that it's the right thing, and that they not feel guilt and shame for that decision. If that makes any sense.
Totally
And
makes
who does the education though, Bill? I mean, you talked about parents are the primary sex educators, but you also said that adults don't want to go to a training on sexuality because they think they already know and they're scared. So schools are terrified of, unless it's private school, of approaching the subject for fear of getting embroiled in a cultural war with some parents. How do we communicate these messages to young people?
Well, one, I think our religions can be really helpful in this area. I think that if we can get religions on board, school boards will get on board. For example, my first experience was when my young people, and I had a small church in Gloucester, Massachusetts, where we lived at the same time as Brian and Ray. My young people once asked me if they could have a sex education course because there was nothing in the schools. And so I said, sure, although it scared me. I didn't know, would I get fired? And so I got the rabbi in town, who's a good friend of mine, and another Protestant minister, and we put together a course for our high school kids. And we thought among the 3 congregations, we had probably 60 kids. We had over 400 kids show up. We asked our kids to come with sign notes from their parents. All 400 came with sign notes from their parents. But anyway, we had to go to the sanctuary of the largest of the 3 congregations, even to hold this course. But the kids were eager and they were excited. And when that course was over, we had parents wondering, what were they getting and what was this all about? So then the Board of Education of Gloucester came to me and said, we read about this in the paper, the papers picked it up. We wonder if you would do a course for junior hires, because we have nothing, and we'll give you the high school facilities in Gloucester. And I said, I will, if we can have the parents too. So we had a course for the parents and the junior hires in Gloucester, and virtually everyone showed up. And we even included the Catholics who would, we had 2 Catholic, we had a Portuguese and an Italian Catholic. The Italian Catholics were friendly and wanted to be in on this. The Portuguese, no. And so anyway, we had this course and virtually everyone in Gloucester showed up in this age range. And then other communities started asking. So I think people are hungry to know. And if we can get them through their fear and help them to see how important this is going to be in bringing up their children, I think we can begin to build communities of sex educators.
Was this Bill? Hayley and I often talk and have guests talk about the hero's journey, being called out to do something challenging, facing obstacles, and then was this your first hero's journey, responding to this request for sex education?
I didn't say this hero, but it was my first opportunity to respond to something that was really a critical need in the community, where I felt that I was serving more than just my congregation, that I was serving the community. Because from there, then we started Head Start. We were the first Head Start program in the country. We were the first group in Gloucester to start an ecumenical council of religious groups, so that we had the Catholics, the Jews, the Protestants on our ecumenical council of churches. We developed the first guidelines for interfaith marriages. And so it just kind of grew from that beginning into a whole lot of ways in which we were serving others, and especially underserved communities. Underserved communities.
Hayley, how would you describe the experience that Bill had and that I had of doing something like sex education or me coming out that just grows and grows and grows and grows? And I mean, you keep saying yes, but the universe keeps offering. How would you put that into your non-religious terms?
Immediately what comes to there is divine purpose and timing, everything at the right time. And again, the Kabbalion speaks of when the ears are ready to listen, the teachers appear. People need to reach a certain point when they're ready to hear the message and they're ready to hear the core. And I think, bringing it back full circle to what you were talking about earlier, Brian, that people are far less looking to join religious organizations than to understand the core message of the religious texts and to figure it out themselves. And I think this is one of the wonderful things, and thank goodness for Bill Stayton for being, at the forefront of a sexual education and normalizing sexuality. And it's incredibly important because just this morning I saw some of the latest statistics on eating disorders within kids. And regardless of whether it's girls or boys, it's now at the point where, kids as young as, 6, 7, 8-year-old are more afraid of being fat than being in a war, than their parents dying. And Bill mentioned this earlier, being able to understand your body, being able to love your body is, again, to me, the core of that, if I, agree with Bill here, is that sexuality, being able to understand what your body's for, how you can experience your body, and how your body is this wonderful vehicle to enjoy life.
Well, I think that we can develop faith communities outside of religion.
Absolutely.
And religions are becoming smaller and smaller, but faith communities, people joining together for discussion groups, for group therapy, for group interaction, it's like going to church for many people. Meditation groups. There are so many different ways in which I think we're reaching out to build what I would call faith communities that are not necessarily associated with a religion.
And Bill, go ahead.
I think we will continue, at least for a long time to come, to have religion and religions. So we need to empower them to be more relevant to their community regarding sexuality, regarding life, I think.
how do you break through the fundamentalist Christian thinking? You know, how do you, because that's a huge segment of our culture, are people who go to these mega churches where the messages they get are really traditional in terms of their attitudes towards what men and women's roles are.
Yeah. One of the things I like working with these groups almost more than I do liberal groups, because they know where they're coming from. So they know what they're bouncing up against, where liberal groups don't know quite where they're bouncing off of. So that I really kind of have more fun with fundamentalist groups, because they know what they know what we're batting up against, and then we can talk about that because they know what they're reacting to, and then I can come up with my side, which to me makes more sense.
How do they listen though? Like,
Right.
you're sitting there and, you know, you're an open person, you can hear them speak and remain neutral. How do you communicate, you know? And I think this goes back to my question I wanted to ask earlier: what is sexual communication? So that you can get sort of that fundamentalist, whatever side that they're on, to listen to what you're saying and to open up to what you're saying.
I don't argue with them. I don't fight with them. I ask more questions, and then I ask more questions, and then I ask, and they get to the point where they can't answer the questions anymore. So then they can begin to listen a little bit better, I think. I mean, that's been my experience.
Mm-hmm.
That has also been one of the best pieces of advice I ever got, was to ask really good questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hayley, who did you get that advice from?
It was from one of my spiritual teachers that very early on, she said that my success was based on how well I can ask questions. Ask the good questions.
Bill, Hayley's group of friends, close friends, I would describe, and Hayley, correct me if I'm wrong, are people who have acknowledged that they have gifts that are spiritual in nature, but not commonly talked about, except among this group and people, such as people who feel that they can communicate with those who are deceased. Hayley experiences herself as a clairvoyant. I, with Hayley's help at age 73, am beginning to focus on gifts that I have that I've never really thought of, and I would be afraid to talk about too much with my old crowd, because they would think that I had, you know, jumped the fence and joined a cult. What's your experience with that? You have a lot of experience with people talking about different sexual responses. What's your experience and feelings about people who have different spiritual responses and experiences? Bill, are you frozen? Do you hear me?
Oh, no, I thought you were asking Hayley that question.
No, I'm asking.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. I was asking Hayley to correct me if I was wrong. But I was asking you. I thought we had another freeze out, but I was asking you. All right, you know, you're one of the most open people I know. How, as a spiritual person, do you respond to people who will tell you that they communicate with the deceased, or who are clairvoyant, or who are empaths? You know, I believe that I have a gift of empathy. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how to define it. I can describe it. What's your take on that?
Well, I've talked with a lot of people whose experience is very different from mine. I've never talked to a dead person. I've never communicated with the afterlife. I don't even know whether I believe in God or not. I really don't care. So that I don't feel that they're wrong. It's just that's not part of my experience, but it's part of their experience, and I honor that.
Mhm. But have you considered that you might have gifts that you haven't tapped into because you've been so focused on sexuality and bridging, sexuality and spirituality? I mean, when your obit is written, they're going to talk about, your life of working as a theologian and sexologist. That's been your focus. Mine will be on gay, education. But have you thought about what gifts you have or have you and Kathy talked about that ever?
Well, I don't know whether this is the answer, but one of the things that really has become meaningful to me was when I was asked to be a professor at Morehouse School of Medicine, which is a Black medical school in Atlanta. And it was one of the best experiences of my career to go there as a professor, because I learned so much about how much people appreciate openness and acceptance, and how much they appreciate your wanting to come into their life. There we really serve underserved populations.
Mhm.
And I continually felt, I wish our white institutions were as welcoming, affirming, and genuine in accepting people of color, for example, or of different religions, as they were in accepting me. I always felt safe. I always felt secure. I felt better with those populations than I do in my own white enclave, if you will.
Mhm. Mhm.
And to me, that then becomes calling even more out from me in terms of what I have to offer. I learned so much about myself in interacting, and about my prejudices and about my beliefs, that really made me excited to learn more about myself and what this meant in working with other people. So that I hope that the skills that are coming out now are skills that were called forth in my interactions with all these different communities, because most of them are very conservative in the underserved populations.
Mhm.
And I really learned to be appreciative of Pentecostals, for example, and some of the work that they're doing. Even though their experience is absolutely, totally foreign to me, but not their humanity, not their willingness to be eager to, I found, learn. Once they feel safe with you, they call forth what you have to offer.
I think that takes an enormous amount of courage too, on your part. And I think on your part, Brian, and on my part, it's one of the things that I'm most grateful for in this life, is to have the courage to be able to sit with people, even if they scare me, to sit and to learn from them, to listen and to ask the questions, because ultimately it's so I can learn, so I can be better, and I can be more of an impact. So courage, I think there. Courage makes good lovers.
Hayley, how are we on
Absolutely.
time?
We're actually right bang out of time, unfortunately.
Oh.
Unless you guys want to carry on going, I do have time, but I know, Bill, I don't know how your day is.
Well, I just want to quickly say that I had dinner with somebody the other night who told me that, and I was talking about gifts and about gay men and what I think unique gifts we bring to the table. And he said that he was at a meeting, several people, he didn't know anybody, he was young, and the Dalai Lama was in the room, and the Dalai Lama kept looking at him, and he finally, Dalai Lama came over and said to him, "You're an old soul." And he felt very affirmed by that. I think the Dalai Lama would say the same thing to Bill Stayton as he was growing up, and certainly now, that you have an energy around you, Bill, that is welcoming. That's what the kids at Boer House picked up, is that you're open. You're an open channel. You channel the light. It doesn't stop in you. You don't have an ego. People who have accomplished as much as you have accomplished in their life, could sit back and say, I've done enough and this is who I am. And you just keep going and growing and responding, don't you?
Yeah. I wonder when I'm supposed to stop,
You're not.
Don't
I
stop.
always said I wanted to stop before people wanted me to stop.
Well, no one
So
wants you
that
to stop.
they wouldn't say, when
I
is
don't
that
want you
old
to
fart
stop.
gonna?
I have the same feeling, tell me when it's, tell me when my voice, some singers sang long after their career should have ended, right?
Yeah.
And I think, oh Lord, all right, but they put in a lot of years, let's clap. I went to see Hello Dolly when Carol Channing did it like in her 80s, and the audience would clap when she'd kick her leg up because they were so pleased she was able to dance. But at any rate, so Hayley, this has been wonderful. Bill.
It has been. Thank you so much, Bill.
Yeah.
I've learned so much from you, and please keep teaching. If there's just me in this world, I will be asking you to teach me.
Me too.
Thank you.
Me too. I love you, Bill.
Love you.
We'll
Love you,
speak
Hayley.
soon. Lots of love.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.